Your faith needs to be put in the promiser, not the promise, which is interesting because I think this is something that is known and understood by anyone who's trying to do something better. As a part of the process of learning how to be better at anything, you need to look at the goal and not the process and the moment. You have to look at what you anticipate the end result to be and not the form or the structure of it. And I just find it really interesting. I mean, here this book is 100 years old, and he's talking about prayer in this way. Like, you can't be focused on the prayer itself, but you also can't be focused on the answer to the prayer. You have to be focused on the promiser, the one who is going to grant or answer that prayer. Sacred Spills, where we explore the eternal in the everyday. 12th lesson: have faith in God, or the secret of believing prayer. Jesus answering said unto them, have faith in God. Verily I say unto you, whosoever shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that what he saith cometh to pass, he shall have it. Therefore I say unto you, all things whatsoever ye pray and ask for, believe that you have received them, and ye shall have them. Mark 11:22. I'm having a lot of fun with this old King James. It's really a fun way of reading, fun way of expressing stuff, but it's archaic, man. Some of these things, like, I'll try not to stumble on a sentence like cometh, saith, cometh to pass. It's amazing how much the language has changed and evolved in really such a short amount of time. It just goes to show how difficult it is to translate the Bible. I've been going through and talking with some friends about different translations and why the Bible is translated in certain ways, and who are the people that are translating, and why do we trust those people to translate. And there's just so many different aspects that go into translation. I don't speak a second language, but anybody who does, I'm sure, can understand and appreciate how difficult it is to transition from one language to the other. But in a language like English that is always evolving and changing and has a speed to it, the other thing about English is that more people speak English as a second language than as a first language. So that kind of changes how it's used as well. But yeah, these old English expressions, they're not actually old English. This is modern English. Shakespeare is considered modern English. It's just so archaic and so different, and the culture and the language has shifted and changed so much. I don't know when we start to call it a new form of English, but it is very different. So on the YouTube channel, I am reading through the book chapter by chapter, mostly because I couldn't find it originally read somewhere. I love to listen to audiobooks. But I was taken by the idea that he says in yesterday's lesson or whatever, this is a 31 chapter book, so it's really meant to be explored and used as like a daily devotional, and it could be used that way. I just don't have the bandwidth to actually record these and put them up every day. Maybe someday when they're all complete, individuals may enjoy listening to one a day and getting some depth or understanding out of each one. Your faith needs to be put in the promiser, not the promise, which is interesting because I think this is something that is known and understood by anyone who's trying to do something better. As a part of the process of learning how to be better at anything, you need to look at the goal and not the process and the moment. Like, if you're throwing a ball, you can't look at the ball. You have to look at where it's going. And if you're trying to learn how to podcast better, you have to look at what you anticipate the end result to be and not the form or the structure of it. There's a lot of conversation around vision casting and creating some type of goals to strive for and towards, and that's what helps to propel us forward. And I just find it really interesting. I mean, here this book is 100 years old, and he's talking about prayer in this way. Like, you can't be focused on the prayer itself, but you also can't be focused on the answer to the prayer. You have to be focused on the promiser, as he calls it, the one who is going to grant or answer that prayer. So there are at least two things that I noticed that happen when we start to focus on the God that we're talking to, or whoever we're asking for the answered prayer, as opposed to whatever it is that we're seeking. One of the things I pray for often is patience, and I want to be patient. I want to be more patient. So for me, not only do I have to go through the patience to the goal of what a patient person would look like in this situation, but I also have to understand my time with the ideal man, with Jesus Christ, is going to help me to learn how to be more patient. Kurt Thompson talks a bit about this in his Anatomy of the Soul and some of his other teachings about the idea of being in community helps us to see other examples of how to behave in situations. And I find that interesting. When you're a child, you don't know how to orient yourself towards the world, and you only learn from example and from teaching and what other people show you. And when you're really little, you think this is normal. And then maybe you make a couple of friends and you go to somebody's house and you realize this is normal for them. It's not normal for me. So it kind of expands your horizons. And then you see maybe the way that my parents responded in this situation is not necessarily the way that I want to continue to respond as well. But unless you even have an example, your imagination may be not even able to get around the idea that there are other ways to seek God, to express yourself in the world. So that idea of the community of believers and seeing how they respond and react, and not really putting someone on a pedestal, but maybe more like how Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. Finding somebody, particularly in a certain area, that you think, well, that person, they do something well that I would like to learn how to do better. So then that becomes a goal that's more attainable and approachable than, becoming like Jesus, which is, of course, our ideal goal, but he wasn't in every circumstance. And of course, not every circumstance was written in the Bible. So we might not really know what that process looks like. And it can be quite discouraging if we're trying to be more like Jesus all the time because he really is so perfect and we can't be that perfect. So finding an individual that's more mature, or at least more mature in certain area, would help to give us a vision or a direction of how to behave in certain circumstances. I know personally, there was an individual who was the director of a homeschool group that I was a part of. And I just loved how organized she was and how many tasks she was able to complete in the structure of her life and how well she was parenting her kids, that I started doing everything I could to hang around her. Of course, we had kids that crossed over a little bit in some of the ages, so that was really a nice way to get in. But anytime she had something that she needed help with, I would volunteer. Like, yeah, I'll come and help you. I'll come and do that. Just so I can watch how she did things and the process that she used to get better at something. Also, in this case, the process she used to teach her children how to do the things that she had learned to do. Some of it came more naturally for her, I'm sure, but a lot of it was learned, and watching somebody do something well opens up our imagination so that we may be able to do things well in a similar way. So that is the idea of not just aiming at being more patient, but having a vision of what it looks like to be more patient, to kind of push through. So that's one part of what's happening when we start to look beyond the physical thing that we're asking for or the literal thing that we're asking for. The other thing is when we spend time with God and in his presence, it actually changes us. We become more like him. When we take those moments to meditate and to read the Bible and to think through who God is and how great and amazing and beautiful he is, how he made everything beautiful, that it's not just functional, but it is actually beautiful. I want to focus on the aesthetic because I think that is what has been missing in the age of reason, let's say. If we're transitioning into a post-enlightenment world, I want to understand the things that were neglected by the enlightened mind. And I think the pursuit of truth, beauty, and goodness that the Greeks talked about these are all important things. All truth is God's truth. All beauty comes from God. Everything that's good is of God. So where our pursuit for truth, beauty, and goodness, it falls in line with our pursuit of understanding and knowing who God is better. But I think with the advent of the scientific method and this hyper focus on figuring out what is true was a process to the detriment of other things. And for me, I think that the beautiful was more neglected. And it's reflective in our art, this very reductionist idea of the material world. Reduce art is not a representation of something beautiful created by an image bearer of the living God. But art is just molecules of paint on a canvas that's two-dimensional and hung on a wall. It's really easy to deconstruct things and pull it apart to its most basic material pieces or parts. And I think our culture has been trained and taught how to do that. And we've done that to such an extent that we've pulled apart the parts and lost the whole. The beautiful thing is more than just the emotion that it evokes within me. It actually is something more transcendent. And I don't want to speak for everyone when I say that beautiful things have caused me to change my life more and change my perspective and idea and understanding towards things more than somebody telling me what is true or even reading it in the Bible. If I read in the Bible that there is no condemnation in Christ Jesus, yet I still condemn myself and talk about how bad I am for not being better. But when I see a beautiful representation of, I don't know, maybe it was a moment. There was a moment seeing the Pieta in Rome, seeing Michelangelo's sculpture at the Vatican, where the beauty of it drew me into a moment that was being represented. I like to think about how, well, in Japan, it's not a very Christian place, and it's been very resistant to Christianity over the centuries. And yet, so many Japanese people are drawn to classical music and the symphonies and the compositions of Bach in particular. Bach was a Christian man who basically took Martin Luther's hymns, songs, put them to four-part harmony and made it beautiful. And he used his creative energy to glorify God. He was a chapelmeister. He was the person who was creating content for his particular church. And there's an aesthetic, there's a beauty there that draws people in. Where am I going with this? Anyway, I want to emphasize and think about the beautiful things that God created in order to use it as a catalyst to change. If God is beautiful, and if his creation is not just functional, but also beautiful, then I want to be in his image and I want to create beautiful things that represent him and that glorify him. There's a large part of this chapter where he talks about how we need the eye to understand and the ear to understand before we draw those things in. We need to see the possibilities. We need to hear and understand the voice of God. That may be a strange way of putting it, hearing and understanding the voice of God. Ironically, today I heard this little clip about how when we're reading, we're actually moving our vocal cords ever so slightly. So we're actually voicing the words even though we're reading in our mind. There's something to understanding, especially when you spend a lot of time in the Bible, you start to realize the way that God speaks and how people through human history have understood how God or ways that God is speaking to them. I particularly love the Gospels because we get that incarnation. We get the actual, literal, physical God in the form of Jesus Christ speaking to people and how he speaks and the way he speaks. Those are all ways to get into our thoughts and ideas and our imagination to help us to grab onto a more realistic idea of how God communicates to us. So keeping that relationship open with God and being able to grab hold of the things of God, to take hold of them and to make them our own. Our imagination was created by God, and we are created in God's image. Now, of course, the imagination could run wild and run amok, but there's that middle distance or the middle eye that it's important to use that visualization or that aspect of our created being to allow God to speak and shift in our lives, to understand that we can grab hold of the things that God is expressing and understand them in new and deeper ways. Andrew Murray concludes with an example of how Abraham heard from God and responded to the voice of God. On page 69, about halfway through, I'd like to read this sentence. It was the revelation of God himself that gave the promise its living power to enter the heart and work the faith. Next sentence. Because they knew God, these men of faith could not do anything but trust his promise. It's in the closeness of the relationship that we start to hear from God. As we start to hear and understand and know who God is, we put our faith and our trust in who the promiser is. If we believe and understand that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-discipline or self-control, we can cling to that promise in times when we feel fearful. If you know God and you know his voice and you understand the promises that he has made to us, then you can hold on to that. I'm going to let go of the spirit of fear. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pray that the spirit of fear must leave because it's not from God, because the word of God says that he has not given me a spirit of fear, so this fear must not be from him. But he did give me the spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. So in ways that my life feels out of control, I can stand firm on the promise that he has given me a spirit of self-discipline. It's not my will. It's not my self-discipline. It's his self-discipline that he's given to me. And I can have faith in that because I know who God is and I believe his promises are true. The last thing I actually want to address is that he uses the word intercourse, and it's just, I can't not address it. It seems so silly, but he's meaning conversation, to be in dialogue with people. And it's really just so funny how, I started this lesson out talking a little bit about how much the language shifts and changes. And in the last 100 years, the phrase intercourse is almost never meant for any other way other than sexual. And so I read it in this book and I think, well, that's an interesting way of putting it. But I know that Andrew Murray is just meaning he has a conversation with God, has a relationship, has an intercourse. He has an interplay with God that's more than just, a casual relationship. He has a closeness in his relationship with God that where the two are becoming one, the two are melding into something more than just dialogue. So I think it's interesting that that language shifted, and I would be remiss to let the term pass by without addressing it, right? So I guess that's all I got. I also have to say that please subscribe, please share. If anything in the episode you like or agree with, let me know. Any ways that you think I can improve, I'm willing to hear that as well. I would love to see some comments. I would be happy to respond to anybody's ideas or thoughts about what's happening in this podcast. I'm looking for engagement. Obviously, I need to get my show boosted in the algorithm, all that silly nonsense. So this is all new for me, and I hope that the content is something that people enjoy. I'm willing to look into growing in that area, but I'm really struggling with more of the bringing it to market kind of stuff. So anyway, that anybody is willing to watch my show to the end or, boost it, I do appreciate that. But next week's chapter 13 is prayer and fasting, or the cure of unbelieving. So I hope you enjoy pursuing God with me, and I hope you remain teachable to him, so that we may grow in our knowledge and understanding of Christ. That's all I got. The end.